Welcome everybody. My name is Vandana Ram. I'm the director of Bankstown Arts Centre. I'd firstly like to ask Auntie Lynn Martin to do the welcome to country. Auntie Lynn is a highly respected local Darug elder, an active member of the AECG and on Council's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Committee. She's collaborated on many of our programs over the many years that we've been working here at the Arts Centre on initiating NAIDOC exhibitions with local school children, as well as the Koori Youth Forum. I've seen her work over many years tirelessly with the local community to increase understanding and awareness of Aboriginal culture and history. Auntie Lynn.
Waramai. Adjara Nagdanga, Darik Nuga. Good to see you on Darik country. Bayu Gulabat Ganiang. Yura, I pay my respects to the ancestors and elders, both past and present. When you walk this great land you call Australia, remember that you walk on the blood, sweat and tears of my ancestors. Every path you take is on top of the bones of many whose footprints we have walked that path before you. These were First Nations people who had to watch their country being destroyed, their food sources gone, and their sacred places run over. They told us, do not use languages, do not eat your food, insist on living on country where they had for thousands of years. We will use your strength and bodies as slaves. You are not human. With the call for a First Nations voice to be heard now being strong, it has only taken 6 years, truth-telling of the frontier wars, how we actually lived, survived, and how families were torn apart. We ask for our voices to be heard, not just in regard to the voice to Parliament, but our stories, our culture, our songs. And I'd like to read you something. It's called Spiritual Song of the Aborigines. I do not sing it. I am the child of the dream time, part of this land, like the gulled gum tree. I am the river, softly singing, chanting our songs on the way to the sea. My spirit is the dust devils, mirages that dance on the plains. I am the snow, the wind and the falling rain. I am part of the rocks and the red desert plains, red as the dust that flows in my veins. I am the eagle, crow and snake that glides through the rainforest that clings to the mountainside. I awakened here when the earth was new. There was emu, wombat and kangaroo. No other man of a different hue. I am this land, and this land is me. I am Australian. This land always was, is, and always will be my land. Again, welcome to Darug land, and I hope you have a good day today. I apologise to everyone, but I've got another launch, a 30th anniversary to go to. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Lynn. Bankstown Arts Centre sits on the unceded land of the Darug Nation. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand and whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I acknowledge elders, past, present and emerging, who are in this space. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. This forum is running in conjunction with the second Bankstown Biennale, titled SubTerrains, which explores stories buried in our immediate landscape in Bankstown. This Biennale is providing a contemporary context, which is firmly located on principles of caring for country, sovereignty, and the call for self-determination. It's been a First Nation-led interrogation of local narratives of land and colonization, historical truths, and buried stories, the role of visual memory and deceptions within local sites of significance. I've been extremely privileged to work at Bankstown Arts Centre as the director for the last 12 years, and it's been coming pretty much increasingly in my consciousness. Number one, that we're on a floodplain. So you kind of think in this urban landscape, where is the water running in this space? But increasingly manifesting in the rain that we're experiencing, this land is sodden and it's full of water. But equally, what is that waterway? What is running beneath the actual surface of this building? And literally the waterways, it's come to my attention, are feeding Saltpan Creek, literally flowing beneath the Arts Centre and its precinct. And this precinct is rich in these narratives. The geography, the topography of the ridges and the waterways specifically connect to the Saltpan Creek storylines, connecting us to this body of water and to nationally significant histories of resistance and resilience of local First Nation people. So I believe it's a very authentic and grounded response, this Biennale, to this place that we meet on today. And it's with great pleasure then I now hand over to Wesley Enoch to chair a very important and I think highly timely conversation generated by this Biennale and with a very distinguished panel of speakers. But firstly to Wesley, who will introduce the rest of the speakers. Wesley is an internationally acclaimed playwright and artistic director and currently Indigenous Chair of Creative Industries with QET. He was the artistic director of the Cine Festival from 2017 to 2021, during which we collaborated on a premiere production at this Arts Centre of The Black Drop Effect, written by Nadi Simpson. Wesley was also the artistic director of Queensland Theatre Company from 2010 to 2015, and was previously artistic director of, it's got squishy in here, Coimba, Idara and Ibijeri. He then directed and wrote a number of local iconic Indigenous productions, The Seven Stages of Grieving, The Sapphires, Black Diggers, I Am Aroha, and Black Cockatoo. Over to Wesley. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. It's lovely to be reminded. I often joke that my mother loves hearing all of that, but it's kind of very shameful sometimes to be reminded of past success, because it tells you you have to keep it up. So what's next? It raises too many expectations, I think. Yes, just to say hello and pay our respects to those who have gone before us. Not just the First Nations people, but all those who have made this place home along the way as well. My people are Quandamooka people from Minjerribah, Stradbroke Island, as well as a whole range of other people. We were talking about ancestry before. I have a great-great-grandfather named Fernando Gonzalez, who was a Filipino fisherman, another great-grandfather named Fataki from Rotama Island in the South Pacific, as well as the kind of my Spanish great-grandfather and my Danish great-grandmother who met post-World War I. And I think that there's something about First Nations families being a site of togetherness and coming together and sharing, which is very interesting as a metaphor, if you like, for how this country is working and continues to work as people come together and become blood related to each other and blood related to country. So my family, the Quandamooka families, are very strong in both arts and politics. My great aunt was Kath Walker, Uluru Nunakal. One of my cousins, well, one set of cousins are the Page family, Stephen Page. Their mother is my father's cousin. There's a whole sense of that kind of world of using the arts and politics as well. My sister is currently the Minister for Housing, Arts and Digital Economies or something in the Queensland government. There's a sense of kind of politics and arts always coming together. And as we talk about this notion too of what is underneath what we see, what are the subterranes, it's a very interesting conversation to be had. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Just to introduce a number of our panelists, and I'll introduce them in order that they'll speak today, just to say that each will speak for about 10 minutes each about a chosen topic in the theme of subterranes, and we'll have a kind of open discussion amongst ourselves and then a Q&A with yourselves as well. Uncle Shayne Williams, the end there, who is an amazing man. In fact, as we were talking about the La Perouse connections and the Darwell connections, also the fact that his father was one of the first Aboriginal OBEs in the country for his work in Aboriginal affairs. And as we were talking outside, Uncle Shayne, this notion too of how your father would take you on trips to show you the work he was doing, making sure that land was handed back and being part of this kind of connection to practice that way, and that's why he got his OBE. This notion too that Uncle Shayne has worked a lot in Indigenous education and research. He's currently the Aboriginal Language and Cultural Consultant with the New South Wales AECG, and is very active in promoting the advancement of Aboriginal languages and culture. And this notion that, especially in New South Wales, advancing localised Aboriginal cultural education through curriculum development and professional development of teachers, and a very important sense of connection to country and waterways as well. We'll talk to Uncle in a second. Aroha, who's beside him there, is in fact beside in many ways, also a cousin of, when we talked this through, I was going, oh, I'm going to call Uncle Shayne, but Aroha, should I call you Auntie? And she said, no, you can't call me Auntie. And I said, you got the grey hair for it though, so, you know. This wonderful sense that the wisdom that we accumulate through our practice. Aroha is a Welwang, Gomeroi and Dharawal artist, born in the Bankstown area, grew up here in the Bankstown area, as well as working in lots of different areas, currently working outside of Canberra a lot at the moment, has drove down today to be with us. It's great to have you here. She works in multiple mediums, including digital and hand-built installations, and her work you can actually see in the theatre next door. There's beautiful meditation on mangroves and waterways, these beautiful sculptures that you can see on the ground with the digital projection on it. And we talked about this, saying her work's often about cultural objects and plants, but mostly about place. And I think most artists talk about place, but First Nations artists talk about it most clearly, where we talk about how we are being involved in, related to, respectful of, but also obliged to place in a very different way. And these themes keep coming out in a lot of Aroha's work. And we work together on Broken Glass. Well, work together, we kind of remember being connected with that project, where incredible installation artist. And often we talk in Western terms, we talk about conceptual art. And we were talking about this, saying, oh no, it's not. Aroha was saying, I'm not a high concept artist. And you go, you are incredibly high concept because it's connected to place so clearly. And that sense of place is in fact a concept in itself. And an incredible artist. If you haven't seen the work next door, please go see it. Then here to my left, both politically and geographically to my left, I think. I don't know, I'm a very centrist kind of person. That's a joke, by the way. Jennifer Newman is the chair of the contemporary, like you're an artist, Canterbury Bankstown Council's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Council, Advisory Council, and a member of the Council's Arts and Cultural Advisory Group. Sorry, there's the advisory group. An executive member of the Cooks River Valley Association as well, which we'll hear more about that, how that works. I love that, especially around here, we're constantly reminded of Cook, of this sense of when they kind of came up the river and, you know, started to, especially with Banks and being in Bankstown, we're constantly reminded of this colonial history. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. She also uses experiential education to help individuals celebrate their cultural identities, but does this in a way that allows them to walk together comfortably with care and respect on Aboriginal land. And I know that we've talked a little bit about the voice as well, this notion of how voice is going to be a very important part, not just the voice to Parliament, but how do we kind of extend our voice in society as well. And I think that artists are always a strong part of that. Language is a strong part of that. Cultural knowledge is a strong part of that voice. We'll talk about that some more in a second. To my right, potentially politically, but definitely geographically. Thanks, Alison, for laughing at that joke. The audience were very dull on that joke. They didn't like it at all. Is an award-winning creative in the forefront of contemporary Australian Aboriginal design and storytelling. She's a Wadi Yuan and Walbunga person and a leading force in Australian design. In fact, Alison and I have sat on so many committees together. I think I don't know why we keep getting put on the same committees, but this notion that Alison has a wonderful moment of connecting culture and design that I've totally inspired by. I remember some of the jewellery work you did, Alison, where you were trying to find the ideas of jewellery and ritual, jewellery as in wearing jewellery, rings, brooches, different jewellery, as a way of creating ritual and connection to country as well, which I found incredibly insightful. And I know the work that you were doing recently with Breville, looking at design in the home. If you haven't seen them already, Alison worked a lot on the Breville collection, of which Lucy Simpson, who is also an artist here in the exhibition, contributed to toasters, kettles, toaster ovens, cappuccino machines or coffee machines, this whole idea of bringing design into your home. And I think that one of the things that Alison's great at is finding that conceptual connection in the everyday, as well as much bigger ideas of the built environment. And we joked about this the other day, that Alison's work, she's going off the charts in many ways, because there's been these new protocols being brought into New South Wales around the built environment and the need to talk to First Nations people about Aboriginal histories, about the connection of this built environment with the landscape that has gone before it. And you've reminded me a number of times about this, there's the philosophy, Philip Myers, I think his name is, off the top of my head, which talks about the multiple cities of Sydney, the natural city that was then consumed by the Aboriginal city literally being consumed by the colonial city, and the colonial city then being consumed and having a relationship to all those cities in its modern context. That we build skyscrapers on the sites of where there were old sandstone buildings. Those sandstone buildings were put together by limestone mortar, which were the burnt down remnants of the middens in Sydney, in all parts of Sydney, which of course was the Aboriginal city that was consumed and kind of made over thousands of years. This sense of this ongoing connection to place, and how do we maintain that both philosophically and practically in the way we look at things. All four of our speakers today have a practice which are sometimes not in the public realm. You may not know their work as clearly, or maybe some of you know the speakers personally. They are all part of the subterranean, all of the things that are under the surface, bubbling away, streaming away, like the very waterways under this art centre, feeding into Saltpan Creek. That there is this flow of ideas that is constantly happening, and how do we bathe in those ideas? And we have this chance today. I'm going to invite each of the panelists to have a little speak, but first we want to look at a little clip. Uncle John, who was talked a little bit about this notion of who we are and where we come from. And can I just say to the tech crew, I can hear a music somewhere. Is that inside or it's outside? Is it? That's what. No control over that. I just thought that maybe I had a little something playing in my ear. All right. Well, we might just go and have a little look at this clip.
Before the white man set foot in Australia, my ancestors were kings in their own right, and I, Aboriginal Chief Burger, am a direct descendant of the royal line. The black man sticks to his brothers and always keeps the rules which were laid down before the white man put foot upon these shores. One of the greatest laws amongst the Aboriginals was to love one another, and they always kept to them laws. Where will you find a white man or a white woman today that will say, I love my neighbor? It quite amuses me to hear the people saying, I don't like the black man, but he's damn glad to live in a black man's country all the same. I'm calling a corroboree of all the natives of New South Wales to send a petition to the King in an endeavour to improve our conditions. All the black man wants is representation in federal parliament. There is also plenty fish in the river for us all, and land to grow all we want. 150 years ago, the Aboriginals owned Australia, and today he demands more than the white man's charity. He wants the right to live.
That's Uncle Joe Anderson there. Uncle Shayne, I'm going to come to you first. Uncle Joe is in fact your great uncle.
Great uncle, yes.
Yeah. What's it like to hear his voice now and see his image? How does that make you feel?
Well, I've heard it plenty times before, but every time I hear him speak, it doesn't change. It's always powerful. And when he did speak, in those days, we were at risk. Could be jailed for making political commentaries, or have your children removed. So it was very dire circumstances for us way up until 1967. So when I was born in 1960, we still weren't citizens of the country. And I finally became a citizen through the 1967 referendum. So I became a citizen of the country in 1967. But becoming a citizen of the country isn't something that was new. It's something Uncle Joe and others were fighting for for a very long time. In fact, my great-grandfather, Hugh Anderson, he was very active in the 1890s. And, he was constantly writing letters of protest, to local newspapers to try to bring public attention to our plight. And, that struggle has been carried on through Uncle Joe. And also my father, who was actually, he was born in Paddington Women's Hospital, but he grew up here in Saltpan Creek. So he is very active, throughout his life as well. In fact, he received an OBE for his work on the 31st of December 1976. So, the family have been very politically active, but we never grandstanded about what we did. We just, done what we had to do, and we was very humble. We went about, our political business. And, like you said earlier, my father he told the principal at the high school that he was taking me out every now and then to take me around the country to be involved in some of his work. So, in those early days, I got to see a lot of dire circumstances myself, because our conditions were still very bad, in the 60s and 70s. Like, we were still living in, freshwater tanks turned on their side, with blankets down the front. It was like that here in Saltpan Creek. And because my family didn't live on a reserve, we weren't entitled to government supplies of any kind. So my father told me that his parents used to make a wagga, so they potato sugar bags. Stitch them up and make like a little sleeping bag, and that's what he used to sleep in. And he never had any shoes. There's one picture of him with shoes on, but that's his sister's shoes, you see. So he always looked after his sister, and mother. And
well, we might come back and talk a little bit more about those camps too. I'd love to hear more about that. I'm just going to get a few more reflections on this particular clip. Aroha, again, your great uncle, I imagine, a relative of yours as well. It's fascinating to hear him talk about the need for representation in Parliament and that thing. How does that make you feel to hear your relative speak there?
So for me, and I'll call him Burriga.
Thank you.
Or Joe Anderson, I'll say, but it feels really formal to say that, and I don't want to call him King either, so I'm going to say Burriga. But it's really interesting because we've got this conversation at the moment around the voice, and I saw recently a friend of mine who is a descendant of Sir Doug Nicholls from Cumragunja, down on the border on the Murray River, and she posted something online about, Sir Doug, or Pastor Doug as he was known back in the day, where he's talking about representation in Parliament, and that was in 1948. And so my piece, which is next door, I used this video along with some images, and I'll talk about that later. But what I wanted to make the point with my piece was that this is not an idea that's just come, you know, it's just arisen, you know, out of nowhere and out of some brilliant mind somewhere. Well, that's the brilliant mind it came from. And I guess it really works really well with this subterranean idea because, you know, as Wesley was saying, is that, well, I'm the only artist in this show who comes from this country, who was born in this country. My first home was in this country. I'm actually named after that house. So my dad was an old fella called Bert Groves. He was very involved in the 67 referendum campaign, very involved because he was the president of the Aboriginal Progressive Association back then. And he was, when Bill Ferguson passed away, he took over that work. He was also the editor of its magazine, Chiringa. And he, at the top of his letters, he used to write Aroha to indicate where he'd written it from. So back in the day, some of you old ones might remember, houses always had a name plaque on them. So I'm named after that house that had the name plaque of Aroha that he used to write at the top of his letters. At the bottom, he would write J.E.F.A. And Jifa is my brother's name. And there's also a tree at that. So my daddy started the one of the first Aboriginal hostels. It might be the first Aboriginal hostel in the country, which is Kirinari down at Gaimea. And there's a Jifa tree down there. So Jifa's my brother's name. So we were named after, I'm named after a house. And Jifa's named after, you know, that justice and equality for all is what that meant.
Fantastic.
So we're very much bound, our names are bound in this country, and where Dad was doing that work and where this gentleman. And I mean, I think sometimes people can kind of grandstand, Cuz used that word before, can kind of grandstand and make it seem like this idea came from them. And in fact, it came from this old man here, this grand old man. I should also explain, cousin Shayne and I are cousins because our pops were brothers and they're buried together not far down the line. And I'm born in 1969, so I was actually born human. So until then we were regarded as part of flora and fauna. So I have brothers and sisters in their 80s and 90s and first people in their 80s and 90s who were not regarded as human when they were born. I, however, was, thanks to the 67 referendum.
Naming's so important. You don't get a name like Wesley James Enoch by accident. Wesley after the Methodist ministers, James after the apostle, and Enoch comes from Genesis 26 and is the grandfather of Methuselah, who was taken by God. And so good missionary breed where I come from in that way. But that idea that our names hold that our history, that notion of, you know, people's last names or even first names being part of that kind of colonial history is very interesting, or our own constructed history as well.
I used to get, you know, people coming up to me when I was young, and it used to be quite overwhelming. And the last thing you wanted to be seen as was your father's daughter, yeah? And because it's big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
And people would come up and they, you know, I'm a Kirinari boy, you know, and they, you know, if they knew the house, because there was a lot of campaigns ran out of that house, and people would know what that name meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why I was named that.
Yeah.
Whereas now, people sort of go, oh, are you Maori? You know, because I say it Aroha, Maoris say it Arawa. They're absolutely appalled by the way that we say it, but I'm not Maori. And,
well, they'd hate my Queensland accent then, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Aroha.
Yeah, don't worry, there's a lot of that. I'm Auntie Row in my family.
But interesting, I imagine your father did that very deliberately.
Yes.
To connect you to place and to connect your brother to place in a very clear way.
Yeah.
Jennifer, I'm going to come to you. This statement's from 1933, 5 years before the 150th kind of anniversary of the arrival of the first fleet, or, you know, this notion of what this old man was saying to the general public was saying, you need to think about us in your history, in your way of thinking. How does listening to that make you feel?
I could listen to this every day for the rest of my life and never tire of hearing Joe Anderson's words and being uplifted by what he has to say. I'm also really excited by the way that the Uluru Statement from the Heart that's circulating at the moment, and it's propelling us towards a referendum. We're on a very slow train towards a referendum. So I'm always excited by the way the Uluru Statement from the Heart picks up the words of the greats who've gone before us. And I'm sure everybody here knows the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Oh,
Or I just happen to have a copy of it if anyone wanted to hear it, to be reminded of what it said. Yes.
let's say it out loud, because
Let's
it's
say it
wonderful
out
to
loud.
hear the words. Yeah.
It's a page of words, but a page of words that I think is enlivened and activated by being read aloud and being heard. And that's something that all of the works here in SubTerrains do. I think they activate these ideas of place and belonging. The Uluru Statement from the Heart says this. It says, we, gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation. According to the common law, from time immemorial, and according to science, more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise that peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia and it disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We're not innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people to take a rightful place in our own country. When we have the power over our destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to the country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of truth-telling, a process of agreement-making between governments and First Nations, and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. It's a page of words that says what Joe Anderson says so eloquently in a couple of minutes.
And in both ways, incredibly generous, incredibly open to things. And in many ways, contentious. I think, you know, that these terms and ideas can be contentious, which we'll come back and have a little chat about. Thank you for that. It's great to hear the words. You know, we talk about this Uluru Statement from the heart, but in fact, to hear the words again, to read the words if you get the chance, actually to even pin it up on your fridge and to be reminded of what that generous invitation is, in the same way that Barraga here, Joe Anderson, was talking about. This generous invitation is so important. Just before we move on, to come to Alison then, just to hear your reflections on hearing that particular clip. I don't know if you could see it on your screen or not, but that...
Yeah, I could, and it's a beautiful clip. And I think, you know, I think about this movement that's been sort of, I suppose, gaining momentum, especially over the last 5 years. And I think, and how it has its roots so long ago with a lot of the activists, you know, like Uncle Joe and many others. And I think, and I even think about, you know, like Jennifer, when we were at UTS 20-something years ago, or whatever it was, you know, we were involved in those riots at UTS actually, where in the Howard years, you know, where I got kicked in the stomach by a cop in those riots actually. Like, he looked down at me and I said, no, don't do it. And he kicked me. I couldn't believe it. So for me, actually, I sort of think about all the conversations that are going on nationally now. Like, Wesley, you would have this, all of you, everyone on this panel would have this perspective where I never thought I would see the day, actually, in my lifetime. And I actually would say I'm a prisoner of hope. I'd say I'm quite optimistic. But even in my involvement with the Conrec movement and things like that, I still really never thought I would see the day where I would hear a Prime Minister say that he supports it. And that we will go through a process of truth-telling and agreement-making with each communities. I think there's a long way to go with all of that. But I just think, given every industry and just this sort of, I think, you know, acknowledgement, recognition of the cultural inheritance that First Nations people actually give to all Australians. And that, you know, I think it sort of coincides, interestingly enough, with this sort of, you know, white people wanting to kind of run away from their whiteness. If I could just say something controversial.
Just break that down for us. What do you mean by that statement?
I mean, looking for more meaning, looking for more, I think, sort of spiritual depth. That there is, I think a lot of these stars are aligning right at the right time, to be honest. And I think once you've got the will from government, you know, we are in a position right now where we can start to design a society. You know, it's like we are standing on the beach with Cook, really, and having a conversation we probably should have had 250 years ago, where, you know, we can actually look at the best of traditional knowledges and this cultural inheritance that comes from First Nations people, our science, our agriculture, our architecture, all of our different industries, and say, well, instead of being secondhand American or secondhand England and having all of this borrowed and transplanted sort of value systems, how about we kind of look at it now and grow it from the very beginning? And but you need this political intervention to kind of start to think about the decolonisation of society.
Agreed. I'm thinking straight away of Chelsea Wadigo, Dr. Chelsea Wadigo, who talks about, she has expletive hope, you know, an expletive that starts with F. She talks about hope being this panacea that stops action sometimes. But I think what she's really saying is hope should be the thing that helps spurn us for change, makes change possible, rather than hope being an end unto itself. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say as well, Alison, the sense that we're not a prisoner to hope, we're not stuck in this situation. We should find that hope motivates us to create change. I'm going to come now to each of the speakers to talk a little bit about their particular take on SubTerrains and their notion of this. And I'm going to come to Uncle Shayne first. Uncle Shayne, you're the chair of the Barraga Foundation. What does that mean, and what is the work that you're doing there?
Well, the foundation was founded a number of years ago, and it was inspired by my uncle's speech, and it has a platform called Songline. So there's, a whole number of Aboriginal communities who have their stories on there, and they own those stories. It's just the platform is where the stories are located, and the foundation also supports students as well. So it does work in that area also, in the area of education. But, it's a not-for-profit organisation, but it's doing very significant work, in terms of, supporting Aboriginal communities and students as well, right across the state. And eventually it'll move into other states as well to provide the same services also.
One of the things you talked about earlier about the camps, I guess, or the places that people were camped along the Saltpan Creek, but also the Georges River. Paint a picture for us about what is the history of this particular location, this particular place that we now call Bankstown.
Yeah, well, in the early days of the colony, a surveyor followed a natural walking track, from CBD, which led straight to Saltpan Creek, and there was other tracks leading there as well, from other directions. And, when they arrived there, it was all cleared. So it was quite obviously an Aboriginal ground. It's always been an Aboriginal place, and way back in 1880, my two great-grandmothers was removed from Sydney and taken to a mission station called Malaga on the Murray River. And the missionary, his name was Daniel Matthews, but when he passed away, there was still a lot of Aboriginal people there from Victoria as well, so the government stepped in and created a reserve called Cumragunja, and that's where they was relocated, and the conditions were really deplorable there, so they walked off. So it was one of the first walk-offs in the country. Aboriginal people just protested, The infant mortality rates were quite high. So the ones from Victoria went back, via the Barmah Forest back to Victoria, and one of my other great-grandmothers came back well before that, but the one that married my great-grandfather from down there came back here, out of Saltpan Creek, because her mother was a senior Aboriginal woman, of Botany Bay and Georges River as well. Yeah, so they came back to their country and the others went back to Victoria. Now there was, a very strong connection between Laparoos and their family here as well. So when Dad's father passed away in, I think it was 1925, he was ex-World War I serviceman and he died from malaria, brought on a heart attack. So he was about 13 at the time and he had to look after his mother and sister. So, his mother had the two kids and, there was that risk of being removed. So they went to Laparoos, to live with cousins there. And that's where he met my mother, because her mother comes from Laparoos side of the bay as well. And that's where we stayed. The first house they had was a tent. Yeah, so there was the twin sisters and my eldest sister. This was before I was born. And then my father built a little tin shack. And Mum told me he used to cut the tongue off the shoes and make little hinges for the door. The tongues of shoes. And he lined up his newspaper to give it insulation, and they lived in there until I think it was the welfare board, which morphed from being the protection board, built a house for us.
And what year are we talking about here, do you think?
When they built the house?
Yeah.
It was before I was born. So it would have been, could have been the 40s, the late 40s, early 50s. But I grew up in the same house, until they built the current one we got now.
And in terms of this particular area, the whatever you can share with us, the cultural practices, you said before that there was a cleared area here as an Aboriginal gathering space or dance ground? Or?
It was always used as an Aboriginal ground. But even when Cook came into Botany Bay, which we call Kamei in 1770, most of Botany Bay was all cleared land. So, a lot of grass and paddocks there. So, this myth that Aboriginal people, didn't practice any form of agriculture is erroneous,
And mostly fire farming, I guess, the idea of...
Yeah, well, we had cool fire burning.
Yeah.
So cool fire burning is a very special kind of burning because we know that underneath the topsoil is small seeds. And with cool fire burning, it's just enough heat to crack them open. And then when it rains, it rejuvenates, particular plants and grasses as well. So there was a lot of that going on. But in fact, when Cook was anchored in Botany Bay, or Kamei, he saw all these fires at night, running from one end of the bay to the other. So it was Aboriginal people's reaction, to their presence in the bay.
Might come back to Alison about that. I know, Alison, you did a project based on that idea of even the storytelling using fire and smoke throughout the East Coast. Do you just want to add a bit of perspective to that?
That the language of smoke, is actually really super sophisticated. Apparently you could actually say something as detailed as, Uncle such and such has died and his son's funerals at wherever, so actually the language of smoke when you're sending messages. So Cook and Banks actually just saw a number of fires burning on ridges. But in fact, there was this quite sophisticated messaging that was going on from south to north, to the point where by the time Cook arrived in Bamaga, there were 10 warriors waiting for him, and they knew that the message that was being sent all the way up the coast, of course, was that there are ghosts coming, because every Aboriginal community on the east coast of Australia believed the same thing, which is that their totem had died and had gone over over the oceans to the east, and then come back as a white man, and that we should bury our knowledge systems and our secrets while these ghosts are here. And, I think it's interesting in terms of SubTerrains, Wesley, that, we're now at this point where, is it these fires that are going to kind of crack open these seeds of knowledge, or is it us that is going to physically dig that knowledge up? But we're at this really interesting sort of point where we sort of have to almost loop back to that story of smoke and healing and fire and the land.
Thanks for Alison. Uncle Shayne, this idea then of the subterranes, what do you believe is kind of underneath the surface that needs to come out?
Well, I think the work that our old people did is still there. It's still omnipresent in the land. And the undercurrent is that, we're still carrying on that struggle. Now, may not be very vocal people, you know what I mean? But when it comes to political business, we know how to organise ourselves, and, we know how to lobby, and we know how to, work with one another when we have to. And I think the Uluru Statement is a good example of that, Yeah. So there is an undercurrent there that people are not aware of, but our struggle is continuing on. It can happen in very overt ways, but we're doing a lot of stuff in very covert ways as well.
It's interesting that
It's
when
the
you talk
important
about...
work that you mentioned earlier that we're doing. Okay.
Agreed. Is some of the research is showing now that almost 70% of all Australians are ready to say yes to the voice, but you wouldn't know that in the media at the moment. All we're hearing is, oh no, why the voice isn't a good idea, but in fact there's a sense of, again, the subterranes, this idea that people are ready. I think every speaker here has talked about what's the next step, how are we going to grow. Aroha, I'm going to come to you for the next 10 minutes to talk a little bit about you're a practicing artist who's in this exhibition as well, and a beautiful, beautiful work, and I've seen a number of your works along your career. Do you believe that your work is a showing of that subterrane, and a public showing, if you like, of those deep ideas?
Absolutely it is. So I was living out bush, out at Brewarrina, when I started the work. And so cousin and I were talking, and, it seemed the most sensible thing to do, of course, is to actually, for me, I always come from place, as you were saying before. And it's not, he's making this sound really good. It really isn't that conceptual. It's about place. It's as simple as that, we'll have an argument about this at another time, Wesley. But no, I mean, I know what Wesley's saying, but so for me, it was about, all right, let's get together, let's go to place. So we went to the camp, and my piece is about, and it was really strange because remember I was on the telephone, Shayne, and I said, for some reason I'm thinking yellow, right, like yellow rock or something. And of course the rock out there is yellow. And, the one thing, and I thought I was actually going to do a piece about this overhanging rock, because along so where the Saltpan Creek runs and where it comes out is at the Georges River. And it's all, of course, it's all mangroves there, so all the mangrove shoots. And, and as, cousin Shayne was saying as well, was that we need those to breathe, But also when we think about rivers, and we're talking about, tributaries, running under this very arts centre, which is why the show's been put together, and then joins up out that way. And, those tributaries and those rivers also carry our very blood and bones. This earth, when we talk about us belonging to earth and that we come from the earth, that's because when we pass away, we become we break down, we become part of the soil. It gets washed in those rivers, it gets put into the trees, it gets spread around, by birds and seeds and droppings and all of those things. And that's what we mean by connectedness, and people sort of, talk about Buddhism and things like that. Well, we were the first Buddhists too, right? Because it is about that connectedness. So I was thinking about, where it comes out, and also where ideas, just heard Burriga speaking there about where those ideas come from. But also I was thinking about fertile ground, So, and I spoke a bit about my daddy before, but he was also at that, I come from an old man, So he was at that 1938 action at the town hall, that meeting, after the 150 anniversary, year anniversary.
This is the day of mourning gathering.
And from that meeting came NAIDOC. And all sorts of things, So, and it's actually documented, you can look it up, there's my old daddy's.
And even from that day came this notion of Australia Day. And when people talk about Aboriginal protest and Australia Day and you can't, actually the protest is just as old, if not older, than the notion of Australia Day, which is an interesting kind of concept as well. It's been there ever since.
That's exactly it. And also that thing of wanting to, kind of have a say and be part of the civic life and the political life, talking about left and right wing before.
Yes.
I am very left, and I actually, I believe in the idea of a republic. It's time to cut the apron strings. And my vision for one day is that we have a republic that actually centres our people in the centre of the Constitution, every single one of our mobs across this continent. You know, that as that centrepiece, you know, so if we're talking about adding on bits and all of this kind of stuff, I personally believe scrap it all, right? I'm still going to vote yes, of course, right? Scrap it all, start again, put us at the centre of it. It'll be a whole lot easier, right? So for me, my work is really grounded in place, and all my work is, it's really about that place that those ideas came from, and that have been built. You know, the only reason we've got the voice today is that those ideas have been built. There's a trajectory. It's a, you know, the reason why people are at that 1938 action is because, you know, it's that feeling that, you know, that uneasiness, you know, and I think that's part of what, it's no coincidence that this voice ideas come at the same time as that conversation around Survival Day, right? And, you know, or Invasion Day, or, you know, whatever you want to call it there, right? So there is an appetite for it, but also, you know, it just makes you feel icky. Like the day before, you know, that day, I throw the windows open and I play every bit of Koori music, Murray music, every mob music as loud as I can, because I figure, okay, have your day, but I'm going to put you in context first. Yes. I do it every year. I get the clapsticks out and I make a big racket out of my house. I've done it for years. And, you know, because that's my thing, and that's why I understand why those things have happened. And what people like Dad were working for, you know, he set up Kirinari so that we could bring young fellas from the bush and educate them. We've got just so many, you know, great men who've come out of Kirinari who have contributed to, you know, the social and political life of this nation, you know. But I mean, I use the word nation loosely because I come from different nations, or any Aboriginal person, he comes from a different nation. So, yeah.
What role do you think art plays in this notion of the voice, or a voice, or us being represented?
I think every time you create an artwork, you are expressing your voice, right? So, you know, my work there's always an agenda to the work, and I think for most of us there always is. And I think it doesn't matter what field you're in, you're always working to an agenda. You know, cousin Shayne works in education, so does Jennifer here. You know, you work in telling stories, so does Alison. We're all working to an agenda because we were brought up properly. Yeah. So, and we were brought up knowing our history, and that's why we're able to talk to, you know, this gentleman here, because that's part of, you know, our story, and it's really close for Shayne and I, because you're talking about our relation, you know, and you're talking about our country, yeah, and I just felt it was really important, and even though it's a simple work. So to go back to the work, you know, cousin Shayne and I went and we spent this day and we just took photographs, you know, and that's what you see projected onto it, and it's meant to look like a wash. You're not supposed to be able to necessarily pick things out. Yeah, but, you know, it's this love for country, and when you've got a voice as an artist, you can talk to that love, yeah? And it's that love that spurs us, and I wouldn't use the word hope either, you know, as some others wouldn't either, but it's that thing that spurs you on, you know, maybe that's seen as a type of hope in itself, yeah? So, to have a voice, you know, and I use my voice sparingly, and that's deliberately. And I use different mediums too to express that, yeah? So I think in what you're asking is that, you know, we don't have to necessarily all suddenly start doing works about the voice. We don't even know what that is yet. We actually don't know the form of that. So it's a pretty nebulous concept, yeah? So it doesn't necessarily mean we all have to do artworks specifically to the voice. Maybe it's just about talking about where we're all from, you know, and making people realise, you know, it's taken a long time for people to realise there's 260 nations or something across this continent, you know, and more languages over that. So, you know, maybe it's about, you know, maybe bringing our friends, our non-Aboriginal friends, our non-First Nations friends along for the ride and sort of saying, look, we're really proud of where we come from. What's underneath it is our blood and bones. It has soaked into the ground. It has been moved along by the currents, and the creeks and the rivers and the birds and the animals and all of this stuff. We are very much embedded in this land, but some of you are becoming too. And maybe you should know where you're living. Like I've come across some issues at work. I've started a new job, and it made me realise, I don't know, you know, I'm 53 years old, and I'm just about to turn 53, and I thought people younger than me kind of got a different education at school, and then you realise how ignorant people are about the place they're living in.
And we were talking about this before. Is that a willful ignorance? Is there a sense of saying, you know, W.H. Stanner talks about the great silence, the great forgetting, that in fact there's a vested interest in white Australia forgetting our long history because it's full of pain. And that what we heard before too, that truth, treaty and voice come, an elder described this as, it's like a fishing spear. There are 3 prongs to the fishing spear. To catch the fish, you need all 3 prongs. You can't go catching a fish, it'll go in and out. You need 2, you need 3 to catch the fish. So
unless you build a fish trap and you can...
Oh, fish trap, yeah. Then you go that way. Oh, we spear from where we come from. But it's interesting, this notion, as you're saying then, I was thinking about kind of modern economic theory, which is talking about the movement away from extraction to regeneration. And we talk about this often, you know, we think about sustainability and looking at First Nations ways of thinking, and that arts by its very nature is regenerative, and that a lot of this country's economy is based on the extractive kind of properties of mineral extraction, but even food and fibre, and this kind of export of those ideas. Which goes back to the very formation of the country itself. The reason the English wanted this continent was because they were on the precipice of losing the North American continent. The War of Independence was 1776, around those. So George III says, yes, we need another continent. 1770 sends out Cook and Banks and says, yep, secret orders, take that place. And so, you know, after losing the Americas, the North America then says, great, go over and now we'll learn the lessons of North America. We won't have a treaty with the local people. Well, in fact, we'll tell them that they don't exist. We will have a military presence, and we won't allow free settlement, and we'll have total military control over the economy of the place.
But not only that, Wesley. You know, I know about places. I've lived out bush a lot, and I can tell as soon as I drive into a place what happened there.
Yeah.
I can tell, because if that street's got that avenue of European trees, right? When all I can see are firs or something weird from somewhere else, all these deciduous trees, right? I know there's something bad happened there. You know, it's that old military strategy of, you know, putting a camp where the people are so they can go away, or just straight out killing them. And we were talking before about, you know, when you're talking about SubTerrains, when I was growing up, when we were doing history in school, the yarn was there were no Sydney people, right? And you're in school going, well, hang on now, I'm getting a different yarn here.
Yeah.
You know.
The smallpox wiped you out, so you didn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and then cousin Shayne will say it didn't even actually come out here. Might have hit the bay in there, but it didn't come out here. You know, this. So in a way, we're subterranean. You know,
Just telling the narrative.
Nobody, because apparently we don't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to, I think, these big ideas and stuff, and come to you, Jennifer. Just a reminder that when you read out those words, this sense of even the act of saying those words has become, a manifestation of the subterranean, and incredibly generous. In many ways, as Aroha was saying, incredibly generous words, when in fact there's great pain and suffering. I mean, your thoughts on those words and what we need to do, what's coming up as a subterranean?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be amongst these generations and descendants, and looking towards a future of action to bring about change. And something that I've been thinking about in viewing the works in SubTerrains, something that I think about when I read the Uluru Statement from the Heart, is where we have been. So to be in the company of you and Aroha, to hear you talk about Bert Groves and his work over the generations, to look back to Joe Anderson and his work, makes me think back to where everybody has been and what our actions forward might be. So I think about more recent movements, and Alison was on the first panel that Julia Gillard appointed, the expert panel on constitutional recognition. After the report of that first expert panel that Julia Gillard appointed to start thinking about constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, Marcia Langton wrote this in an essay. She said, "The main challenge for those who agree with our findings, that is the expert panel's findings, is the poorly understood friction between bringing Indigenous Australians firmly into the national polity and maintaining their exceptional status as inexorably different." And that's a really beautiful and important announcement to think about, which is where the next slide with that picture of that family comes into being.
There it is, it's up now.
Here it is. So my view of the voice to Parliament and the constitutional change that we're seeking is very much that this is about Australia making changes to its constitution. It's not about Wiradjuri constitution or Wongal constitution or Bidjigal constitution. It's about Australia fixing up its instruction manual to say some things about how the nation and its parliament relate to and recognise and work with all of our continuing existing sovereignties. And so I think of this photograph. I like to look at this photograph. In the centre of this photograph is my nan, the woman on the right, and they're the four youngest of her 7 children. And when I think about that idea of bringing us into the national polity, it makes me think about my nan dressing her 4 children on this day to go up the street, and look at my little uncles in the front there. They've got their little shirts on, buttoned up to the necks, and their beautiful cardigans also buttoned up beautifully. And I think about my nan getting those boys into those shirts and cardigans. And that's what we're thinking about here, how to bring us into the national polity. Because how do you get a cardigan on over a long sleeve shirt? It's a great metaphor for what we're trying to do. And if you go about it in a rush and you just try and stick your arm into your cardigan and your sleeve gets all bunched up and you go, oh, it itches and it's uncomfortable and you don't like it, that's not the way to go about it. How do we bring us into the national polity? You do it the way your nan told you. You get your sleeve down here and you grab hold of your cuff. Yeah? You grab hold of what's important, this sleeve on your arm. You grab hold of that and then you start to ease it into your national polity, and you get your national polity all sort of lined up around it. You line the sleeves up, yeah, and then you move it up and you adjust it and you keep your arm out straight and you keep a hold of this important thing. And so in that gradual movement, and it requires up and down the arm movement. It requires some around and around, backwards and forwards, side to side movement. And eventually you get your cardigan sleeve up over your shirt sleeve, and you're warm and snug and things are fitting together well. And that's what Nan did on this day, which is about the same day as Joe Anderson was filmed down there on Saltpan Creek. This is a 1930-something photograph. That's how Nan got those boys into those cardigans over their shirt sleeves. And that's that challenge for us to bring our polities into the Australian polity with a firm grip on what's closest to us and adjustments all around for a brighter future.
You reminded me that there's a quote by Uluru New Knuckle that says, if you pour your pitcher of wine into the river, there is only the river, there's no longer your wine. And this notion of, no, you have to actually hold yourself separate and together simultaneously, which is what we do in our lives, if you think, we kind of go about our lives knitting together all of those elements along the way. And I think when I think back to the work you're doing, Uncle Shayne, this notion too of by bringing language into the, encouraging people to understand culture, understand language, holding on to those things, that must be very important for you as well.
Yeah. Well, languages in this state was one of the first to be eradicated. But the thing is, we held on to a lot of it. So, the authorities at the time couldn't destroy what they couldn't see. So all we did was we took our languages underground and we held on to a lot of it. The Dharawal language is still very strong, and we have our kids speaking it. So we have a semi-immersion program for Dharawal kids at La Perouse, and that's the best time to start teaching them the language. They actually grow up with it. And that's a practice in Aotearoa in New Zealand as well. When they set up their language immersion nests there across the two islands. And that model has also been adopted by the people in Hawaii as well. So in linguistic circles, when a language is almost dead, they call it moribund. And in Hawaii it was very close to that, and now they're speaking in a full fluent way as well. And also the Sami people have adopted the model too. But in New South Wales, I believe that language and culture should be taught simultaneously. And I made that recommendation when I did a study for the Office of Aboriginal Affairs back in 2011, that we should have language and culture nests in the state. So language and culture is being taught simultaneously.
Yes.
And we have 5 operational nests in the state now. So language it takes the cultural experience to a whole different dimension. And we see a great sense of pride in the kids, when they learn their language as well as their culture as well. Unfortunately for us, we have to have language and culture being taught simultaneously. Otherwise, if we just try to run language immersion nests, we may not get the full content, because once you walk into a language immersion context, you can only speak full fluency. If you start speaking English in a language immersion context, that program defaults to something. It's not a language immersion context, you see. But once you start getting culture in there as well, then you can get the full content. And I've been, promoting this sort of concept, since 2017. And the state government is starting to, pick up on it now. So it's now become a Premier's priority. It became a Premier's priority when Gladys Berejiklian was the Premier. And it's gradually starting to get some traction there, so we can start to, I think, well, not just predict, but expect that there'll be a lot more cultural programming in state schools in the coming years, and hopefully, the model can be adopted, by other states as well. But I'm not assuming other states aren't doing anything, you know. But what I've come up with is a cultural syllabus that can not only help schools develop and institute their own cultural programs, but communities can do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes beyond the schooling system. And, yeah.
And Jennifer, when you talk about that sense of the holding it together, and I keep getting a sense of how do people hold on to arts, culture, well, arts. It's interesting, we keep delineating arts like it is separate to culture, when in fact it's all together.
No, well, everything's holistic for us.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
You know,
But Jennifer, what other things do we need to hold on to as we move forward into this putting on of the cardigan?
Put on your cardigan, hold on to yourself. But even, you know, when you come to the Arts Centre here to come and view this exhibition, hold on to yourself and find yourself in all of the works that are around here. You know, Aroha's made us, the mangroves have shown us place, and the light, the projection shines down and activates us into that piece. We can go across the courtyard here, we can go and look at Lucy and Nadi's Maya home piece, and if you look carefully into there, you'll find yourself. You'll see yourself. And so in all of these examples, what's happening is that the art is activating us, but we're also activating the art. And that's and recognizing how we work together. You know, Aroha's mangroves are beautiful and lovely, but if they sit in there under their projections on their own, are they doing what you hope they do, Aroha?
It's not up to me. I make the work. I put my meaning to it. Other people will put their own meaning to things.
Yeah.
And I mean, the arts are really, for us, the arts are where culture is realised. It's the basket that our culture is shown.
But I've got to go and see it.
Yeah,
I've got to go and see
whichever
it
form
before I
that
can
takes.
even do anything, and that's
But what you're saying too is that it needs to be activated, that the audience needs to receive it, the audience needs to get a sense of what the response is, that it's not just for its own sake. I'm going to come into Alison now. Alison, thank you for your patience up there in Coffs Harbour. This notion of, you work a lot as in the architectural spaces as well. We've been talking about art in the gallery context and culture in its kind of both historical and contemporary context, but talking about the built form is a very interesting, different kind of sense of culture as well. Hand over to you to have a little chat.
Yeah, thank you. And I probably just need the wide angle. I've got a close up of you right now.
Of me?
I've got a few. Yeah, hi. You look amazing, by the way. Seriously tanned, incredible. Thank you. Because I just have a few slides to show. And I love your cardigan analogy, but I was just thinking as a designer, of course I love the cardigan analogy, but I feel like we're at this part in our nation's history where we have to knit a new cardigan together, you know, and it's kind of the weaving of these different histories, these different values, these different threads that, you know, to create a new cardigan. And I suppose just thinking about country, you know, we've all been talking a lot about country and how country is not just the land, it's the sea and the sky. Of course, we talk about caring for country and sustainability. So, of course, our cardigan will be made of recycled hemp, of course, but and we'll care for country as we move forward. But I want to, you know, the built environment and design is such a dominant language of the modern world that I feel the role of the arts, you know, the voice is just the voice that we're talking about with the Uluru Statement and the referendum. It is incredibly important because it's about setting up the architecture of how government and the legal system will talk to individual communities all throughout the country. But the flesh on the bones of that, I suppose, is everything else we are doing, the artists, the stories we're telling, you know, the buildings we're building, you know, the work you do, Wesley, in terms of creating new ceremony, new rituals, you know, for us to be doing, you know, on country every day, you know, I think that's where the hearts and minds piece is. And I think that that's something that, you know, it's a shame really that the government isn't really engaging artists at 1,000,000 miles an hour to kind of tell that story, because I think when people, 70% of Australians say that they support the voice, I think they're talking about that hearts and minds piece. They're talking about the fleshy, soft parts of our nation and how we're going to build our nation moving forward. But look, I'm going to actually show some pictures here because I can't really talk about architecture and design without showing pretty pictures. But I'm going to go through them reasonably quickly. And I can't really talk, there's two sort of philosophical aspects of the Aboriginal world view that I just want to kind of discuss in relation to how we're approaching design and the built form. And Aroha's brother, Jifa, you know, who I work with very closely, you know, is very much about his work is about this as well, is seeing country or the built environment as an extension of our notions of country. And I want to talk about country as a library, because Aboriginal people didn't have the written word. We embedded all of the ecological and cultural knowledge that we needed, our sciences, our agriculture, our astronomy, everything was all wrapped up into very elaborate stories that were then embedded into our three-dimensional environment. So as we walked through country over time, we would activate these stories and we would remember all of the knowledges that we needed in order to survive. They were written in the stars, they were written in the rock, the river, the tree. And so that's why, you know, when you go and destroy country, you know, to us, you may as well walk into the Mitchell Library and just set fire to the place. You know, destroying country is destroying our library of the dreaming. And so when we talk about songlines are these threads of knowledge that still very much part of the fabric of Australia. They may have been buried in the subterraneans at the moment, but I sort of feel like my role, particularly in Sydney, because, you know, I have two ancestors that were recorded at the boathouse where the Opera House is now, Tubagali, you know, in 1790. They were, as do Uncle Shayne and Aroha. This is our traditional land, and I sort of feel like with these layers of built environment sort of capping those threads of knowledge, that I feel my role as a designer working in urban design is to amplify and to preserve these songlines and share them with everyone, because we all have, I mean, I see it as a great gift to all Australians, because these knowledges are about sustainability, they're about caring for family. There is some beautiful cultural values at the heart of it. So just going to the next slide. This is an image of a man in East Arnhem Land, Frank Gramanamana, and he's making a fish trap. And so what I want to demonstrate, you know, as he's making this fish trap, he's singing to it, he's talking to the fish trap, he's talking to it like it is a person. And I think that we see country as animate. So we don't really have all of our objects, all of our artworks, all of our artifacts, everything we build, our homes, they're all an extension of country, and they are all animate. They have spirit, because again, it is an opportunity to activate and to strengthen the library of the dreaming. So when Frank is making this fish trap, he's talking about the fish trap ancestor and how he made this water hole over here, and at that water hole in the wintertime I can get this type of fish, and then I went over here and made this. And so he's remembering, it's sort of more than remembering, actually, the act of making the library of the dreaming and animating the library of the dreaming is ceremonial. And so that's why I think, you know, it's an important notion for it to get across, in that we don't just see the design environment as purely functional. Next slide. And so the three themes that, you know, I work at a lot of different scales. I work in a lot in urban design, and I'm focusing mainly in Sydney because it is my waja, you know, like this is where, you know, my family grew up in La Perouse. And so I'm very much wanting to focus on engaging traditional owners in the creation of these new places. This is the vision for White Bay, where there was a power station. And just very quickly, one of the big things that we're doing there is we're sort of seeing knowledges as the power of the future. And so we are regenerating this coal power station. It's in the middle of Sydney, to create a water song line. So what we're actually doing is taking the water from the port in White Bay, and every day at high tide, so twice a day, we'll flood the public space with the water, clean it with salt marsh, and then allow the water to go back. So the site itself becomes this sort of this lung, if you like, that breathes in and out the water and cleans the water, because there are these endangered seahorses in the water as well that we want to regenerate and protect. So and at some stage we'll invite Wesley Enoch, famous Wesley Enoch, to come and do a water ceremony or a seahorse festival, or some way of actually engaging everybody in these stories, that when the tide comes in and out, you can actually reveal language, you can reveal histories, you can reveal stories. And so the not just the people who live around there, but everyone who visits this site will actually get engaged in these knowledges and protect them. So moving on. I suppose the next big theme, and you know, that really is about giving voice to traditional knowledges, but another obsession of mine is giving voice to truth and truth telling. You can go to the next slide. This is a work that I was commissioned to do as part of the Cook 250 series of works, which Uncle Shayne was very much a part of as well, where it was about telling the story from the shore. And this was in reference to our people seeing Cook as someone who was dead. So wara wara wara, the words were, these people are dead. That this was a reincarnation of the whale. So this work is based on not only the ribs of the Endeavour, but the bones of the whale, which are almost identical, actually. It was a happy accident that I kind of overlaid these things. And so somewhere I think the Vikings were probably looking at biomimicry and looking at the bones of a whale in order to build a great ship. But I think, just to the next slide, this is part of a sort of a Black Lives Matter kind of, you know, what came out of Black Lives Matter is there's a whole series of works going on in the US as well, where we're starting to look at monuments and rethink them. This is a work by an amazing African-American landscape designer named Walter Hood, and it's in South Carolina, in Charleston, where they used to trade Black slaves. It's two reflective pools, and it's tidal. So when you know, it's beautiful and reflective. But then when the tide goes down, you see the bodies of all of the slaves as they were sort of kept in the bows of the ships when they were brought over here. And so it's a really, I think what we'll start to see in design and placemaking in the future is these really sort of powerful, heavy-hitting sort of works about truth-telling that will help us, I suppose, tell our side of the story, but also invite people to heal. And then the third thing I just want to talk about, which is you, Wesley. Can you go to the next slide, please? Is about ceremony. And this was your beautiful work as part of Sydney Festival at Barangaroo, which told the story of the overfishing of Sydney Harbour, where 4,000 fish were caught in one day in the early days of the colony. And so Wesley and Emily McDaniel and other artists, Stephen Russell, I think Lucy Simpson was involved as well. Like there was a number of artists, that created this amazing ceremony over time, where people could go and take the water from the harbour, have it frozen, then go back and return the fish back to the ocean. And I think, you know, we do another ceremony at Barangaroo as well, where we invite mothers on Mother's Day to come and have their babies welcome to country. You know, these I think are the sort of, so it's not just about design of places and the building of places, it's about how do you animate them and how do you activate them where, in a meaningful way, where you're actually inviting people to care for country like it is their family member as well, you know, like as we do. And I think that's where I think we'll start to have a massive sort of impact, I suppose, on the design of Australia moving forward. I think I might have, and then just finally, you know, just talking about, there's another slide, another few slides, and you can flick through these quickly if you like, but this is the Breville project. And what I love about this, first of all, I pitched this project 16 years ago at a wedding that I was at in Margaret River, right? And it's the story of my life, that for the first 15 years of my career, nobody really cared at all about what we were sort of on about, which was, you know, the power of Indigenous storytelling, Aboriginal storytelling, etc. But 3 years ago, the same guy that I met at that wedding rang me up, and he was the head designer for Breville. He said, we want to do this project now. And even though they had so much to fear in a way by, you know, stuffing it up and getting it wrong as a big global company, because Breville is an Australian company, but they are massively global. So, but Jim Clayton, the CEO, he just said, you know, look, we've got so many reasons to say no to you, but the one reason we're going to say yes is because we want to give our global platform to you and to these artists, Lucy Simpson, Wallampiri Jappaljari, Yalti and Yakulti Napangati, three of the artists that were in the Pintupi Nine that walked out of the desert in 1983 and saw a white man for the first time. What would it mean to give their stories, to give voice to their stories and to give that voice a global platform? So, you know, these artworks are now, I think it's just one more, Lucy's amazing toaster, which is just like about ancient grains. It's so beautiful. And, you know, she is someone, there's an artist who really has, you know, I just want to give her a global platform, you know, because she has so much to say. Still waters run deep with that girl, but she is amazing. And now her work is in Harrods, in Bloomingdale's. It's about to go to Galeries Lafayette in Paris and into everybody's homes, because these objects are wrapped in country. These objects are wrapped in those stories. They're wrapped in that meaning. And they're the stories I think the world needs to hear.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for that work. I know I have bought 10 of these toasters to give to family members and things. They're great kind of just reminders, even if it's not your country, a reminder of our country in many ways as well. We've rapidly ran. Please do.
Thanks, Alison, for putting 4,000 fish up today, because it was November of 1790 that extraction of 4,000 fish came out of the harbour. So it's a bit of a beautiful happenstance of time that we've seen 4,000 fish today, and we can think about Barangaroo being defiant and angry and making her statement about being heard and recognised, because it wasn't just that they took 4,000 fish out of the harbour, but it was that the men took over women's economy, women's work, that the self-declared state took over the local fishing co-op, that the local regulations for bag size and catch size, and the distribution of the wealth of the harbour was taken over by that self-declared state. And this is the sort of the series of issues that we seek to address with a voice to Parliament and being heard. And so so thanks, Alison, for bringing 4,000 fish today. That's great.
Timely. As I was saying, we are rapidly running out of time because we could talk forever about these things, but I want to make sure that we get at least 10 minutes or so of if there are any questions you might want to ask the panel. And I will ask you to be incredibly disciplined about this in terms of asking questions, because often we can talk a lot about, because there's so much to share. Everyone wishes to speak their truth, and these forums often become about that. But we do have microphones either here, which would be great, you'd be on video if you come to this microphone, but there's also a secret microphone over here if you don't wish to be videoed. If you have a question you might want to ask the panel. I'll let you think about a question quickly. Go to a microphone, either one, go up to a microphone, or if you don't, you can just whisper it to me and I'll say it out loud. Go for it.
Sure, I'm not shy. Hello, thanks for the wonderful talk. Aroha, you mentioned, the whole question of being a republic. And I'll never forget a friend of mine who said, well, what makes you think we deserve to be one? And by that he meant, even the short walk from Bankstown Station to the Arts Centre, obviously there's, predominantly a big Vietnamese community. And it makes you think how anathema it would be to a people like that under, centuries of Chinese rule and French rule and Japanese rule, American war, which was, horrific. The question of sovereignty and the self-respect that comes with that would be not even a question, right? And we're a country that could tick a box and make it happen tomorrow, but we can't be bothered. So why is that?
I don't know.
I'm fascinated by, Noel Pearson talks about the 3 grand narratives. If you ever have a chance to have a Google of it, he talks about the 3 grand narratives of the nation. He says the oldest continuous culture on earth, the British colonial project, which was set up a lot of the institutions and a lot of the structures of this country, and the 3rd narrative being the most multicultural, multi-ethnic nation on earth. And that those 3 narratives seem to be, even looking around this room, those narratives sit side by side, but in our public discourse, they seem to be at odds with each other. And I think that sometimes the apathy that we experience is one where we go, that's a bit hard, isn't it? We can't deal with that. And I worry about that as a nation that sometimes...
And maybe we should be getting a bit interested.
Agreed.
But when I'm talking about a republic, I am coming very much from, as an Aboriginal woman, I have a lot of friends from other nationalities. I know we hear a lot of non-Aboriginal people say they got that Aboriginal friend, right? So I don't want to sound like that one. But I've worked in the arts. When you work in the arts, you mix with all mob, yeah? For me, I think also, this Queen passed away, and we've been talking about Republic for a really long time, and we've all been really polite to that Queen, because she was, grand old lady and all of that business, right? We appreciate that she, did the work she had to do and was born into and all that business, right? But we've waited now, and it seems like this is the time, yeah? So it's more around that, and look, for a lot of Aboriginal people, that's not something that we're, a lot of our people are living hand to mouth. Yeah, sometimes, these conversations are a luxury in any community that's living hand to mouth. And that includes ours, yeah? And it includes all the mobs that are here who are just trying to get through. But I mean, if we could put, our people at the centre, that, this is the land and we're the people who've looked after it for so long, for so many people to come and enjoy and live here, yeah? And of course, it's about bringing all our friends along, yeah? So, that's what I mean in that context, because, and also I'm one of those people, I've got to throw a little red herring in there somewhere. Okay, so, you know, you want to talk about one thing, I'll bring in that other conversation, because they are actually side-by-side conversations. We're talking about making a change to a current constitution, right? Or we could have an entirely new one and have a Bill of Rights sort of document. Of course, you know, let's hope we don't have guns on that one, right? So, you know, it's the time for having these conversations. It's timely because, you know, we've waited a long time for the old girl, you know, yeah.
Just very quickly, I completely agree with that phrasing of waiting.
Yes.
Well, we're always waiting, mate, that's the reality, yeah. We're always well behaved and we're always, you know, waiting for something good to happen, and then we try and get out there and try and make something happen, then we have to wait for permission, and like my whole life has been about waiting and about seeking permission in my own country, yeah.
We've got another question over here.
So beautiful, beautiful work and beautiful talking. It's been a privilege to be here. And I think one of the things that keeps coming up is how to make the voice, and much more than the voice, central. You know, you talk about the holding on to the sleeve, you talk about putting it, Aroha talks about putting it at the center. And also we heard about how people want the flesh and bones, not just the skeletal kind of version. And I think all these things are actually connected. And I'm just wondering, you know, when we talk about the voice in a public kind of way, often what people are hearing is more representation for Indigenous people, which of course it is. But the Uluru Statement and everything that's being said here today makes it very clear. It's not just about representation of a particular people or even First Nations. It's about a whole change of heart.
Is there a question coming?
Yes, which is how do we make that how do we publicize that? Because I think it keeps getting heard as representational, and then the onus is back on Indigenous people to show what exactly they mean.
Can I quickly say something to that?
Yeah.
When you make things right for our mob, it will flow for everyone, because we don't just think about our mob, yeah? We're not scared about other people. We've had that long tradition, you know, the North people always mix with the Macassan, the Indonesian mob, you know, with the Maori mob, you know, that used to come over. We're multicultural within this continent, and having to learn to talk across and having trade languages and things like that. We really understand multiculturalism, yeah? And we're often the people, when people first come to this country, people hang with us and then, you know, find their communities and things like that. And the next mob come in and they hang with us because we're the kind ones, yeah? Right? So it is about, when you get it right for us, we think it's really about everyone then.
Can I just add, just to distinguish the two steps here that we're talking about when we're talking about the voice. The referendum is about putting in a constitutional obligation to have a voice, not the design of the voice. And this is where we get a bit confused at the moment. So in 2005, when the John Howard government dissolved ATSIC, because it was part of it was legislated through the parliament, he could dissolve it, there was no constitutional obligation to replace it. If there was a constitutional obligation to have a voice in whatever form, they would have had to construct something new. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the referendum. Then there's the conversation about what will the voice look like, and that will be constructed by the parliament itself and legislated in consultation with people. So just to distinguish those 2 points, that the constitutional referendum is about enshrining the idea of there must be an obligation for Parliament to have a First Nations, Australian Indigenous voice to Parliament. And then the next process is, what does that voice look like? And I think we conflate the two in the same way we did with the referendum around the Republic, where we said, well, what kind of republic do we want? We go, no, we should actually have said, we want a republic, and then what kind of shape. And so that's a lesson learned. And often when we start to jump this conversation, we jump past the referendum to what will the voice look like. And to be honest, again, it's, blackfellas, we have to ask permission to have our voice for some reason, when what we're really saying is enshrine it in the Constitution that there must be a voice. And then let's work out together what that voice looks like, knowing that in 100 years from now it could be different. In 200 years from now it could be different, but it's enshrined in the Constitution, so you have to have it.
And it's a reasonable proposition. Why shouldn't we have a say in what happens on our own land?
Agreed.
But it's only in relation.
Jennifer first, and then no, go Jennifer, and then.
I was just going to say, and from the other side, why should the government not be instructed to listen?
Yeah.
Which is, sorry, Alison.
Go, Alison.
No, but the voice in the referendum is really only about the dialogue between every community in Australia and government for when they create a new policy or they create a new law. So we can't assume that if we get a successful referendum, that's the panacea, that's going to do, like, we're done. It's unfinished business, we're done. Like, that's really just the start. I mean, once we have that architecture in place, that architecture of how we talk to the legal system, that's when we're going to start doing agreement making and truth telling. But every industry needs to look at how it can reimagine itself with Aboriginal cultural values at its heart, and also the immigrant story at its heart, like to truly reflect who we are as a nation.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap this up because we've only got a couple of moments. And I'd love to hear from each of our panelists again about this idea of what are the things that are subterranean that need to come up. Alison, I'm coming to you first. What do you think are if you were to name one thing that you think is the most important thing that's underneath that needs to come up, what is it for you?
I want to say two. Can I? Well, for me, it's traditional knowledges, and truth telling about our true history, because England is to blame for creating a offshore detention centre here, and we have to talk about it.
Mm. Well, what do you say to people that's just a form of guilt tripping?
Well, it's not, but nobody lives in Australia. It's not our fault. Like the blame is with England. And I think England have gotten away with this. And I think we need to actually, and that was the whole trick of Howard and the history wars and everything back in the day, was to say that if you have white skin, then you're to blame. That's not it at all. That's not what went down.
The idea of the black armband being replaced by the white blindfold.
Correct.
Which was an interesting kind of metaphor for that as well. Jennifer, one thing that you think's kind of subterranean at the moment that needs to come up?
What's embedded in the earth and what's under the earth and what's travelling through all the watercourses is that notion of sovereignty. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is clear that it's about coexisting sovereignties. And if we can lift our minds and our hearts up to think about sovereignty, then we'll move in a strong political direction.
Can you define sovereignty for me? Sorry.
I thought we were wrapping up.
Yeah. You've got 30
Get
seconds.
ready for this. No. Sovereignty is the power to exert governance and law over territory, and a governance and law that comes from creation or the origins of people and is maintained through generations. So sovereignty is, so our continuing sovereignties are my Wiradjuri sovereignty on my country, my recognition of Darug sovereignty, of Wongal sovereignty, of sovereignties everywhere that I travel, to recognise an obligation to take care of and ask permission from other people when I move on to their territory. It's the part that was missing. It was in 1788. It's the part that meant there was an omission of a treaty. But now Australian sovereignty is here, and I'm a citizen of Australia, and I'm a sovereign Wiradjuri being. I'm existing and coexisting sovereignties. I can recognise two systems of law, and I can work creatively and constructively and very consciously to follow all of those laws.
Sovereignty, sovereign, to reign. I love all those kind of connections to the linguistics of language there.
There's another word that I like to talk about a lot. It's suzerainty, which is about a different relationship. Where
What's the word again, sorry?
Suzerainty. Suzerainty is a relationship where a more powerful entity recognises the pre-existing or coexisting powers of a less powerful entity, and it's indicative, I think, of Australia's relationship with Britain now. That there's a suzerain relationship there, where Britain says we are, we're the sovereign body, but we don't really do anything down there. And Australia goes, yeah, we're sovereign. Well, really, Britain's sovereign, but we're sovereign. But also the way that on occasion Australia recognises Aboriginal sovereignties. It's a little bit recognised in the Native Title Act, a little bit. It's a little bit recognised in the way that education programs can expand into, language nest models and the proposals that we bring. It's a little bit recognised in the way that acknowledgement of country is expanding and growing and becoming a really conscious and natural part of our practice in all sorts of ways here. And Australia doesn't say, oh, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that. Australia says, oh yeah, we should do that. Let's have that here as part of the nation. So that suzerainty is something that's actually.
Well, maybe the idea, I'd be interested to see if this King Charles says, actually, I don't want Australia anymore, you can go. Really, and we've forced him to be a republic. Aroha, something that's subterranean that's coming up for you that needs to come up.
In the end, I look at other examples in other countries, like somewhere like America, and there's some great co-management models, yeah? Maybe the term sovereignty is not the term, yeah? Maybe it's about finding a way where everyone really gets a say, yeah? And maybe what we're forgetting about and what's hidden are people.
Uncle Shayne, your final words from you.
Yeah, thank you. What I'm going to say is based on my experience. So I've taught tens of thousands of people, a lot, right across the state. And it's really astonishing how many people come up to me and say, I didn't know that happened to you. Now, why teach the contact history? Not to make people feel guilty, but to make it transparent to them that precisely what happened, And I had one person come up to me and she was furious. She said, why wasn't I ever taught about this? Well, yeah, that's what thousands of other people are saying, They've been very good at suppressing, the contact history in this country, the atrociousness of it, and the various levels of attempts to get rid of us, to wipe us on the face of this earth, Now, we need to be able to teach that to the next generations as well, because the biggest mistake we will make is if the next generations of people coming through, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people alike, don't get access to this contact history. It's not about making anyone feel guilty, because there's nothing really positive I can think about in the contact history, really. It's been abominable, from the very get-go. So, truth-telling and ensuring that, the contact history is told transparently, and that Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people are the leaders in that process, Because it is absolutely astonishing to me how many people don't know it. It's unbelievable. And they find it unbelievable as well.
Yes. I think everyone in this room,
they're asking for it. They're calling out for it.
Well, these people have self-selected to be here, to hear those stories, to be exposed to it. In your experience, you'll know lots of people who aren't self-selecting to engage. How do we engage them? How do we pass on the story? What are we doing to make these subterranean themes and ideas more to the surface, a bit more. I just want to end with one story. When my grandfather died back in 1964, my father buried him and put a tree, planted a tree, and never had a gravestone. And every time we visited, we knew where to go because that tree. And we literally called that tree our grandfather because we knew that that tree fed on our grandfather and is now this massive ghost gum that sits in the cemetery. And that sense of obligation to that tree to stay alive for us is the way that we keep our grandfather alive. How do every single Australian have an obligation to an animal, a plant, a place, to keep it alive, to keep it fertile, to keep it growing, to keep it a sense, that obligation alive, to keep memory of place alive is the most important thing for me. That things that come from underneath the soil, things that have been buried, need to have life and to live in the leaves and the twigs and the branches of every tree in our life. So I'll leave you with that. Could you please join me in thanking Uncle Shayne, Aroha, Jennifer and Alison for the fantastic contribution. 2 hours of an amazing conversation. And thank you so much for attending as well. And big thank you to Vandana and all the folk here at Bankstown Arts Centre for an incredible afternoon. Please see the exhibition. Thank you very much.